Welcome back to the Buddhist Audio Bookshelf YouTube channel. Today, we continue our reading of Meditation by Thanissaro Bhikkhu, also known as Geoffrey DeGraff. We deeply value your support. Please like and share this audiobook to reach a wider audience, allowing more people to benefit from its wisdom. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, ensuring you receive immediate notifications as we upload new content. Together, we can spread the teachings of meditation and mindfulness, fostering a community of enlightenment and inner peace. Thank you for being part of our journey to make these profound teachings accessible to all. Let's start today with reading The Karma That Ends Karma. October 12, 2005. This practice we're doing here is called the karma that puts an end to karma. And because karma is intention, this means that the practice is the intention to put an end to intention. That's why it's tricky. If you intend to put a stop to intention, that's an intention right there, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. It simply means there are going to be some unexpected twists and turns along the path. As the Buddha said, the central part of his path is right concentration. Concentration basically means intention, sticking with one object. You focus your intention on staying with the breath, staying with goodwill, whatever the object of your meditation, and then you try to maintain that intention. Then you see what you can learn about intention in the course of trying to maintain it, what other things you can learn about the mind as you try to maintain that intention. The usual culprits to begin with are distractions, either internal or external. The internal ones are other thoughts, other intentions. At RST you hardly realize that they're intentions. You're focusing on the breath, everything seems and then suddenly you're someplace else, half a world away. It's as if someone snuck up behind you, threw a sack over your head, dragged you and then dumped you on another continent. You don't know what happened in the meantime. You don't catch sight of the fact that an intention triggered the slipping away. There was one brief moment when you decided, I'm out of here. Something else popped up in the mind and you went for it. There was a choice. This is why meditation requires so much mindfulness and alertness. As we practice, mindfulness means the ability to keep your original intention in mind. Alertness means the ability to keep watch over things around that intention. On the one hand, you focus on what's going on with the object of your concentration. On the other, you keep track of how the mind is relating to it. Learn how to catch any warning signals that the mind is about to go. It may take a while for you to catch them because they're subtle and quick. The only way to see them is to stick with your original intention and keep yourself warned. Okay, the mind is going to leave, so keep watch for how it does it. At the same time, work on ways to make the original intention a good one to stay with. Otherwise the mind is going to resist. Staying with the breath, if it's not comfortable, is going to be like trying to keep a balloon underwater. It'll stay there only as long as your grip is really secure. As soon as there's the slightest slip, there it goes, popping up out of the water. This is where you have to get your dilemmas on your side. They want comfort, so give them comfort. Try to make the breath as comfortable as possible. The breath here is not just the air coming in and out of the lungs, it's your whole sense of energy out in the body. As the image for the RST jhana says, it's like working moisture through a ball of bath powder. Or you can think of making bread. You put water in with the R and then knead it through the R until every part of that ball of R is moistened. You take whatever ease and sense of refreshment that comes from the breath and try to knead it through the body, all the way out to the tips of the toes, all the way out to the tips of the fingers, all over the front and back of the body. That makes the body a good place to stay. Or you can think of systematically going through the body. Relax the fingers, relax the palms of your hands, the backs of your hands, your wrists, your arms, anywhere you can detect tension that pulls you out of a nice comfortable straight up and down posture. Start with the tips of your fingers and go up your palms, the backs of your hands, up your arms to the shoulders. Then start with your toes, go up your feet, your legs, pelvis, up the back to the neck, and then all the muscles around the head. Then try to develop an all-around awareness that can keep the whole body relaxed all the time. This makes the body a much nicer place to stay. As you work on this, it engages several parts of the mind, such as the desire for pleasure and the desire to explore as you begin to see connections throughout the body. This means you've got allies inside. As Ajahn Lee said, it's like taking Mara and putting him on your side. So that's one strategy for staying with your original intention. Another strategy is to learn to be very quick in dealing with your distractions. It's so easy to get entangled in the storyline wherever your thoughts lead you. If the distractions come from within, a little thought bubble comes up in the mind and says, "Let's explore this and see where it goes." And you end up ending yourself in the Andromeda galaxy. In other words, these things can take you far, far away, into whole other worlds, whole other stories. Sometimes it's hard to pull yourself out of those stories because you want to see how they end. It's almost as if you're committed to it. This happens all the time. You walk past a TV and suddenly end yourself in some stupid story. You know the stories on TV are stupid, but you still get sucked in. That's because you're already a sucker for getting sucked into these stupid stories in your mind. So you have to learn to develop a certain amount of skepticism for these stories. Do you really need to know the end? Learn how to cut things in the middle of a story. The characters won't mind. In other cases, the storylines don't start out with internal distractions. They start out with external irritants that pull you away. Other people say or do things that irritate you, and all of a sudden you're focused on how much you don't like what they said or did. Then you get upset because they've destroyed your concentration. You can build up huge narratives about how they shouldn't have done that, shouldn't have destroyed your concentration. Actually, they weren't the ones who destroyed your concentration. You dropped it, ran after them, and then found some satisfaction in blaming them. Again, you've got to learn how to pull yourself out of that mindset as well. No matter what anybody else says or does, the breath is still there. You made the choice to leave. That's what you've got to watch out for. So the whole purpose of concentration practice is to get to know the process of intention. The best way of doing that is to stick with this one intention as much as you can, because it gives you something to measure your other intentions against, so you can notice how they move. Then, after the distractions get less and less compelling, you can begin to look into this intention you're trying to maintain. What is it made out of? Mostly verbal fabrication and mental fabrication. The verbal fabrication is directed thought and evaluation, two of the factors of jhana. Directed thought is when you focus your intention on an object, evaluation is when you examine the object, seeing whether you like it, don't like it, what comments you have to make on it. These two processes lie at the basis of every sentence in the mind, every sentence you speak. That's why they're called verbal fabrication. Then there's mental fabrication. Feeling and perception. These things have their intentional element, too. Even when you drop directed thought and evaluation to go from the RST jhana to the second, there's still feeling and perception. In fact, the perception of breath is what keeps you there all the way up through the fourth jhana. Try to hold on to that perception until the breath energy in the body grows still. Then you stay with still breath as your perception. After a while, the border between your body and what's outside your body begins to dissolve. You begin to realize that the border was a perception reinforced by the movement of the breath. When the breath gets still, there's nothing to reinforce it. So you can adjust your perception to space or consciousness, and there's no border to these things. In other words, after dealing with distractions, you're able to focus on the one intention that forms your concentration, and you begin to understand it. What's the process of fabrication going on in here? If it weren't consistent enough, you wouldn't understand it, for you'd get nothing but eating glimpses. A lot of your insights are just that little eating glimpses. And then you try to connect them. It's like playing connect the dots. And the problem with connect the dots is that the dots can be anything, like the constellations in the sky. We look up at Orion in the winter and we see his belt and his knife hanging from his belt. People in Thailand, though, look up at the same stars and see a plow. The belt is the actual plow, and the knife is the part that pulls the plow. And who's to say that we're right and they're wrong? The same holds true for our connect the dot insights. If awareness isn't continuous enough, all we see are the lines we've drawn. We don't see the actual dots. But when you can stick consistently with your original intention, you begin to see the actual dots and the actual lines. What actually connects to what causes what, and what actually makes up this intention we've been working so hard to maintain. The other insight that comes is that, as you're maintaining an intention, it's like maintaining a yoga posture. Just as you relax into the yoga posture over time, in the same way you're relaxing into the concentration. You begin to realize that certain activities in your original intention are not necessary to keep it going. After the mind begins to settle down, you have less and less need for directed thought and evaluation. The breath gets more comfortable, you get more settled in, and there comes a point where you can drop the directed thought and evaluation. You can just be one with the breath in the same way that when you're in a yoga posture, you begin to realize that you've been tensing certain muscles that you don't have to tense. In fact, you'd be more comfortable in the posture if you relaxed those muscles. But those insights into which parts are going to have to be relaxed, you can't will those beforehand, but you can pose the question in your mind. What would be more comfortable here? That's how you can develop insight. When the Buddha talks about developing insight, he focuses on posing certain questions in your mind. How should fabrications be regarded? How should they be investigated? You can't put the mind through a vipassana mill and guarantee that it is going to come out with insight. But if you learn to pose the right questions, and these are basically questions that come from the Four Noble Truths: where is the stress? What are you doing that's causing the stress? Insight starts with simple things like this. What's tense in the breath? What's tense in the body? Where is there any blockage in the body that's really unnecessary? When you see, you learn to relax it. Then you focus on the mental factors maintaining your state of concentration. Which ones are an unnecessary burden that makes it hard to maintain the concentration? Once you've settled in, you learn how to relax those mental activities. That's the pattern for insight, and you follow that pattern all the way through as it takes you from one level of concentration to another. It takes concentration as far as it can go. Try to maintain your concentration as much as you can, because the more consistently you can maintain it, the more you're likely to catch sight of those unnecessary actions. They're activities, they're inconstant. If they were totally constant, you'd never catch sight of their existence. It's because they come and go that you realize. Now it's here, now it's not. There's something going on here. The stress comes. The stress goes. The cause comes, the cause goes. And insight is a matter of learning how to catch sight of these things as they happen. You pare down the intention to stay still until there's nothing left to pare down without totally dropping intention. Again, that's something unexpected. You can't intend to see it at a particular moment, but you can pose the question. The posing of the question is what's called appropriate attention. That's what opens things up, makes it possible to see things that you didn't intend to see, or to see them where you didn't intend to see them. This is how things nelly open to the deathless. The deathless is unintended. It's something that, when you hit it, you realize was always there, and that nothing you can do will change it. The reason you didn't notice it before was because you were entangled in your intentions and the results of your intentions. But you can't get there simply by saying, okay, I'm not going to intend anything anymore. That doesn't do it. You have to intend right concentration. That's the doing. That allows you to understand what it means to do well enough so that you can actually stop doing. That's the karma that puts an end to karma. The intention that allows you to understand intention until you nearly get to the point where you can stop intending. And it really is a stopping of intention. It's not a hall of mirrors where you say, okay, I'm going to stop intending, tending, which is an intention to stop the intention, which is an intention, and just goes on and on and on like that. You can't reason yourself into this, but it's something that can be induced. You can bring yourself to the brink where it can happen. So work at this intention, the intention to stay focused on one preoccupation. Get to know it. Get to be on good terms with it. Get as much of the mind on your side as you can through making the breath comfortable, through making the process interesting. And then learn to be resolute at cutting away things that aren't really helpful, things that pull you in other directions. This is going to require all your ingenuity, all your attention, but it's one of the few skills in life that's really worth all the effort it requires, that more than repays all the effort put into it. It'll see you all the way through every possible type of suffering, because its rewards are more than you can intend. You can think about the goal, you can have a picture of what it's like, but the picture in your preconceived notion has an intentional element. It's part of the path because it helps you along, gives you encouragement, but the actual rewards when they come are much greater. So keep reminding yourself of the Buddha's instructions on tranquility and insight. For the tranquility, it's a question of how to settle in, how to really steady the mind in its intention, how to indulge in it, which means to learn how to enjoy it. The insight then comes in learning how to question the intention, not in the sense of doubting it, but in the sense of learning how to investigate what's going on here. When you learn how to bring the activities for tranquility and insight together in the right balance, then you really come to know what the Buddha was talking about. Analyzing the breath. April 18, 2005. When the Buddha teaches mindfulness immersed in the body, the RST thing he discusses is being mindful of the breath. It's good to stop and think for a few moments about why he starts there. One of the reasons is that the breath is your most immediate experience of the body. We have a tendency to identify ourselves with the solid parts of the body and think of the breath as something secondary, something that comes in and out of the part we inhabit. But actually you wouldn't know about the solid parts of the body, the solid sensations in the body, if it weren't for the breath. For one thing, you'd be dead. And even if there were some way of being alive and not having the breath, the only way you'd know that there's something solid is because something is moving against it, moving over it. So think about this as you're focusing on the breath. One way of approaching the body is thinking of it as primarily breath sensations. Ajahn Lee lists a whole series of them. The breath that moves up the body, the breath that moves down the body, the breath that goes out through all the blood vessels, tensing and relaxing the muscles in the blood vessels, the breath that goes out the nerves, the breath sensations that spin around in place. The breath energy constantly radiating from the diaphragm, the breath constantly coming up the spine. There are all kinds of breath sensations in the body. One way of making the body more comfortable is to think of it as all breath. Every sensation has a breath aspect to it, so focus on that breath aspect. If anything seems tight or tense, don't write it simply as being a solid part of the body. Think of it as a breath sensation that somehow got tightened. Loosen it up. Approach it as you would a breath. That should be moving through the body. See how that changes the way you relate to it. This is one way of making the body interesting. An important principle in concentration practice is that if you try to rely solely on willpower to stay with an object, you won't have much staying power. But if you ND the object absorbing, it's a lot easier to stay. So look at the body in a new light, from a new perspective, and see if it becomes more interesting to be sitting right here, not doing much of anything else, just staying with the body, exploring how it feels to be right here, and not traveling around outside. If you try to lock the mind into the body, it's like locking a child into his room. He's going to try to figure out some way to get out the window, or start doing something in the room he knows his parents don't like, just to spite them. The mind is like that. If you lock it in with an object, it'll start doing things to spite you. So the trick is to leave the windows and doors open, but give the mind lots of things to play with, to get absorbed inside. That way the child will stay in its room without your having to force it, without your having to lock it in. The breezes come in the window and they won't blow you away, because you've got something interesting right here in the present moment. When the breath energy flows more smoothly through the body, aches and pains will calm down. You'll be healthier in general. As you really get to know the breath, That it can induce a sense of refreshment which, as you allow it to stay, gets more intense and shades into rapture, all simply from being with the breath. So, if that the breath is boring, it's because 1. You're not paying attention, and 2. You're not asking the right questions. You're assuming lots of things you don't really know about the body in the present moment. Learn how to question those assumptions. Is the body as solid as it seems? Certain sensations of tension or tightness, do they have to be there? Maybe the way you're breathing is what's maintaining them. As you allow yourself to get absorbed in the breath, exploring these things, you require less and less willpower to stay here. This is the kind of concentration that has discernment as one of its integral factors. In terms of the basis of success, it's the fourth one. Concentration based on the powers of analysis. So give it a try. Explore what's actually happening as you just sit here. The breath comes in, the breath goes out, the breath spins around in place, gets blocked here, out there, dissipates here, gets strong and constant there. Explore these things. It's part of learning how to take care of the body. And that in taking care of the body this way, you're taking care of the mind as well. Immersed in the body. September 19, 2004. Some people think that when the Buddha describes the V aggregates, he's describing what we are, but that's precisely what he's not saying. He's saying that we're not that. But the mind does identify with these things, sometimes with the body, sometimes with feelings, perceptions, thought formations, sometimes with sensory consciousness, sometimes different combinations, sometimes all of the above. If you could take a movie of the mind sense of itself, it would be erratic and mercurial, like a reaction on water slithering here and there, identifying with this, identifying with that, shape-shifting all the time. In changing position all the time like this, the mind expends a lot of energy. One of the things that we want to try to do as we meditate is to get it to stay in one place, to save some energy. As long as you're going to have a sense of self, keep it solid, rock solid, immersed in the body. Breath meditation is one way of staying immersed in the body. The term in Pali is Kagatasati, mindfulness, immersed in the body. And the quality of immersion is important. You want to the whole body, occupy the body, inhabit the whole body, as much as you can. Where is your observer right now? For many of us, it's like a weird bird perched on our shoulders and peering through our eyes. It watches the body as if the body were something separate. But as we meditate, we're trying to get away from identifying with that particular observer. We want to be an observer ling the whole body. Your feet your feet, your hands your hands. Your entire sense of who you are LLS the entire body. This puts you in a position of strength, because if you're leaving big gaps of unoccupied territory in your body, other things will occupy it, different thoughts, different elements. But if your awareness occupies your whole body, other things can't get in so easily. The image in the canon is of a solid wooden door. A ball of string thrown at the door won't leave a dent at all. Even if things do come in and make a dent on the mind, you're going to know it, you're going to see it because you're right there. You're not in some other corner of the body looking at something else. So as you focus on the breath, try to get past the idea that you're in one part of the head watching the breath in other parts of the body. You want to occupy the whole body, bathed in the whole breath. The breath in the body should be surrounding your sense of where you are. And then you want to maintain that sense of being centered in the body like this, ling the whole body with your awareness as you breathe in, as you breathe out. Why? For one thing, this sense of ling the body helps you stay in the present moment. When the mind goes thinking thoughts about past and future, it has to shrink its sense of awareness, shrink its sense of itself, down to a small enough dot, so that it can slip into the past or slip into the future. In other words, you latch onto the part of the body that you use as a basis for thinking about the past or the future, while other parts of the body get blotted out. But if you ling the body with your awareness and can maintain that full awareness, you can't slip into the past and future unless you want to. So this is one way of nailing yourself down to the present moment. Your inner hands are nailed to your physical hands, your feet to your feet. You can't move. Think of the breath coming into the whole body. Every cell of the body is participating in the breathing process, and you're sitting here in the midst of it. This gives your sense of observing self a greater solidity, so that when thoughts come into the mind you're not knocked out of balance by them. You've got a solid foundation. The word they use for the object of meditation in Pali, aramana, literally means support, the idea being that your mind is standing RM on something. You're standing here in the body. This is your location. This is where you take your stance. And when your stance is solid, nobody can kick you over or knock you down. It's like riding on the subway in New York City. The subway sways back and forth and up and down and all around. If your stance is planted just right so that you don't get knocked over either by the acceleration or deceleration of the train or the swaying to the left or the right, you can maintain your balance no matter what. But life is a lot more erratic even than a subway train. The things that happen around you, sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations, things that people do, things that people say, they can hit the mind with a lot more violence, with a lot more force than the wobbling or sudden braking of a subway train. So the mind needs a really solid stance. This is why we work on providing this support for the mind, not only while we're sitting here meditating, but also throughout the day. Some people complain that it's asking too much of them to pay attention to the events of the day and to the breath at the same time. Well, if you're sitting in the back of your head watching the breath in the body and watching things outside, it does add an extra burden. You've got two things to watch at any one time instead of just one. But if you think of yourself as immersed in your body, inhabiting your whole body, this puts you in a different position. You're standing in the breath, in a position of solidity, a position of strength. From that position you watch things outside, so that instead of having extra things to do, you've simply got a better place to maintain your stance. If your sense of self is inhabiting one little part of the body, and things come in from the outside with great force, somebody does something or says something that hits you the wrong way, you can get knocked out of kilter really easily, because your stance isn't solid. The mind is so used to getting around from one position to another that it's very easily knocked out of balance. But if you're standing, link your whole body with your awareness. This is your stance, this is your support, then no matter what comes, you can keep your balance. So try to maintain this sense of inhabiting your body, being bathed in the breath, being surrounded by the breath on all sides, not only while you're sitting here, but also as you go through the day. Try to maintain this quality of being fully immersed in the body, fully aware, fully mindful, fully alert. Once you can maintain this stance in different situations, then you can start observing the sense of self you've created here. If your sense of self is sitting all around RST with a feeling, then with a perception, then back to a feeling again, then to perception and feeling, like those weird amoeba-like shapes that did across the surface of water, it's hard to observe, to get a sense of, what is this self? Why does the mind need a sense of self? But as you maintain this one sense of self inhabiting the body, immersed in the body, surrounded on all sides by the breath, it's there long enough for you to observe it. What's it made of? What's the form here? Where's the feeling? Where's the perception? Where are the thought formations? Where's the consciousness? It's all right here, relatively still, enough that you can really observe it. There are lots of advantages to having a sense of mindfulness immersed in the body, your sense of self immersed in the body. Eventually you take that sense of self apart, but in the meantime you learn how to use it, so that you don't get knocked over by all the winds and currents of the world. You don't get knocked over by all the currents owing out of the mind either. When they talk about taking the body in and of itself as your island, as your refuge, this is what they mean. The current of the river ows past, but the island stays solid because it's deeply rooted. It's made of rock, like Manhattan, it's not a sandbar. You've got your awareness deeply rooted in your hands, in your feet, in the different parts of your body, not just in your head, not hitting around from here to there. You've got a large sense of awareness linked to present. This puts you in a position of strength, which you want to maintain for as long as you can. It helps ward off the currents that come owing from outside or inside, and it also allows you to see your sense of self a lot more clearly, to understand what it is where there's still soaring even in this position of strength, where there's still stress and uncertainty and inconstancy. But you do your best to make it constant. How are you going to believe the Buddha's teachings on inconstancy until you've found some constancy in your awareness? You push the limits. It's only when you really push the limits that you can gain a true sense of where things start pushing back. When the Buddha gave his teachings, he didn't simply ask for people to believe what he said. He said to push back inside yourself to test them. So, inconstancy, stress, not self. How do you test those? By creating a constant sense of ease in the body, because this awareness has to be relaxed in order to last. And you can identify with it, inhabit it fully. It's only in this way that you can push against the limits and see where the principles of inconstancy, stress, and not self will push back even in this state of mind. But work on it. Remember, this is a skill. Taking this stance, maintaining this stance, being concentrated in the body, but concentrated with an expansive sense of ease, so that it doesn't become oppressive. Work at linking the body with your awareness, so that if they were going to take a picture of your sense of self, of the mind's sense of self, it would be like the image in the canon. A person totally surrounded by a white cloth from head to toe. Or like Ajahn Lee's image of the mantle of a Coleman lantern, all its threads bathed in a bright white unmoving aim. Try to saturate your body with this sense of relaxed but steady awareness, and see what happens as a result. Marshalling the emotions. October 7, 2005. Meditation has to engage not only the thinking part of your mind, but also the emotional part. Otherwise it gets dry and doesn't totally train you. So it's good to think about the emotions that need to be involved in meditation for the training to be more complete. The emotion you're supposed to bring to the training is samvega. That's the emotion Prince Siddhartha felt on seeing the old person, the sick person, and the dead person. Samvega is a word that doesn't quite have an equivalent in English. It means a sense of shock, dismay, or urgency, and it's related to the adjective samviga or teried. It's a chastened realization of what life is like, that the pleasures you've been pursuing are eating and never really provide satisfaction. Look at you yourself. You're eating as well. And the amount of soaring in life. Not only is life eating, but there's a lot of soaring before you eat totally away. There's that famous passage where the Buddha says that the waters of the ocean are less than the tears you've shed in all your many lifetimes. You've drunk more milk from your mother's breast, whether your mother was human or a dog or whatever, than there is water in the ocean. As the Buddha concludes, just thinking about these things should be enough to give you a sense of terror, dismay, and dispassion, enough to make you want to gain release. Taken on its own, samvega can be a very depressing realization, which is why it has to be paired with pasada, or condense that there is a way out. In the famous story about young Prince Siddhartha seeing the old person, the sick person, and the dead person, he also saw a forest mendicant. That was his fourth vision. His realization after seeing the forest mendicant was, this must be the way out. If there's any way out, this is it. And so he pursued that conviction with a strong sense of clarity and condense. Ajahn Suwat, when led the meditation here at Metta, would often say, start with a sense of pasada, that this is your way out. Stick with the practice with that sense of conviction, condense, desire. If you approach the meditation in a desultory way, you're going to get desultory results. You really have to be devoted to what you're doing here. Or as Ajahn Fuang would say, you have to be crazy about the meditation if you want to meditate well. You have to get fully into the meditation so that it really engages your imagination. What can be done with the mind as you focus it on the breath? What can be done with the breath? How can you learn to relate to the breath in a way that allows you to settle down and see what's going on in the mind? Be curious. Find out. When you meet up with obstacles, you need the sort of inquisitive mind that doesn't give up, that tries to end a way around the obstacles with the conviction that there is a way around. That's what the condense is for. If you're lost in the woods convinced that there's no way out, there's going to be no way out. If you think there's a way out, at least you have a chance of ending it. So, when you come up against issues in the meditation, be content in using your ingenuity as much as you can. If you end yourself controlling the breath, it's natural that you're going to be controlling the breath. In fact, it's important to realize that that's happening. Many times they say, let the breath come in and out on its own. Don't control it. What happens then, though, is that you don't notice how you're controlling it. The controlling all goes underground. What we're doing here is bringing the issue of control out into the open. As long as you're controlling the breath anyway, try to do it consciously, skillfully. And what is it that controls the breath? There's an intention and there's a perception. Can you be clear about your intentions and perceptions? Can you change your intention to be more sensitive to what the breath really needs? Can you change your perception of the breath so that the way you control it actually causes less stress, does less harm? What ways of thinking of the breath coming in and out of the body help to overcome the unhealthy or unskillful ways that you control the breath? What different kinds of breathing energy are there in the body? Look into that as well. You'll end that different kinds of breath energy are helpful at different times. When you've got lower back problems, it's good to think of the breath energy coming up continually from the soles of your feet, giving more strength to the back as it goes up and then out the top of the head. If there's a tightness in the chest, think of the tightness dissipating out through the shoulders, the arms, and the fingers. In other words, use your ingenuity so that you become more and more interested in staying in the present moment. All too often we approach concentration practice as an exercise in forcing the mind to stay still. Not to think, not to move, not to do anything. And of course as soon as you tell it not to move, it's going to start jetting around like a little kid told to sit still in a chair. But if you give the kid something to play with, something to explore, he can get still and very enthralled. He can sit in the chair for hours without complaining. So try to engage your ingenuity as you practice. And always have the content conviction that no matter what the problem in your meditation, there's a way around it. That condense is going to help see you through. Of course, simply the condense is not going to be enough. You have to use your ingenuity until you start seeing results as well. And when you start seeing results there will be a sense of ease, and a sense of rapture. A sense of fullness or refreshment. When you've figured out how to be with the breath consciously and intentionally, and yet can allow the breath energy to feel full in every little cell in the body, rapture arises. You can maintain that rapture by learning how to maintain the right amount of pressure, so that you're not squeezing the breath, pushing it or pulling it, and some people experience this as a sensation of drowning. They're so used to breathing in a particular way, or having the mind's cartoon idea of what the breathing has to do as it comes in and out the body, that when they give up on that cartoon idea, there's a sense of drowning. Some people find this really scary, but it's nothing to be scared of at all. Simply sit with it. If the breath is going to come in, it's going to come in. If it's not going to come in, don't worry about it. You're not going to die. The breath will have to come in at some point if it really has to. And maybe it won't have to. Maybe you're getting enough oxygen through your pores. So allow the breath not to disturb anything that feels still. If you don't disturb the stillness, it grows a sense of fullness, and with it a sense of ease. You become a connoisseur of your breathing. You learn to really enjoy it. This amount of enjoyment is a necessary part of the path as well. It's the food of your meditation. As you learn to feed that, you start looking at the other things the mind has been feeding on, and realize that they're pretty miserable food. This is where the sense of nibbida comes in. It's sometimes translated as disenchantment, sometimes even as disgust or revulsion. What it means is a sense of having had enough of something and no longer being attracted to it, because you've got better food to feed on. Once you're used to good wholesome food, you feel repelled by junk food. You don't crave it anymore. A lot of the preliminary work in discernment consists of learning how to maintain a sense of stillness, of being centered with a sense of fullness, and learning to adjust it as you need it. Learning to gladden the mind when it needs to be gladdened, to release the mind when it needs to be released, to steady it when it needs to be steadied. And every time you catch it slipping to feed on something else, ask yourself, why are you going there? What good do you get out of that kind of feeding? A lot of the discernment comes in seeing that the other things you've been feeding on all through your life really are not worth the effort. You've really got something much better here. Only when you've been able to use the concentration as a basis for overcoming passion, especially sensual passion, do you have to transcend the concentration itself. That's when your sense of nibbida, or disenchantment, can turn to the concentration, because you've discovered something in the mind that doesn't need to feed on anything anymore, even on the pleasure and the rapture, the equanimity of concentration. That's when nibbida and viraga, or dispassion, become total. That's when they can liberate the mind. As you can see, the meditation involves a long series of different emotions. The Buddha sometimes talks about the grief and the joy of being on the path. Those get involved as well. The grief is simply the realization that there are a lot of dangers in life, and you haven't reached the goal yet. But you learn how to use even the grief as a spur to your practice. At the same time, it should be combined with a sense of conviction, desire, leading to the joy that comes when you can actually see yourself making progress. The mind can settle down more than it used to, has a greater sense of well-being, wholeness, and fullness than it had before. You can take joy in that. So even though the path involves figuring things out intellectually, that's not all it is. It's also a matter of learning how to marshal these different emotions, some of which are normally regarded as negative. Samvega, grief, disenchantment, disgust. But they have their uses, so learn how to cultivate them all along the way. Without these emotions, the practice doesn't go anywhere. With them, it can take you to release. Good humor. May 11, 2005. Ajahn Suwat would often begin his evening Dhamma talks by saying to put yourself in a good mood, to approach the meditation with a sense of confidence, reminding yourself that you're doing something that's very good. It may be difficult, but it's good. And it requires that you keep yourself in a good mood, no matter what happens, no matter how poorly it goes. Grace under pressure is an important skill in the meditation. The ability to smile to yourself no matter what happens, what the Thais call smiling in dance of the tigers. That ability has saved a lot of meditators from going a course, getting discouraged, and letting their meditation crash. So whatever comes up in the meditation, treat it with good humor. The ability to laugh at yourself is probably one of the most important abilities you have as a meditator. It's a matter of perspective, and also a balance. After all, you have to keep a certain amount of pressure on yourself as you meditate. This is an earnest endeavor we're involved in, but you can't let it get grim. Find out for yourself what exactly is the right amount of pressure to put on yourself, and how to apply the pressure skillfully. You've probably heard the story about the monk who was so delicately brought up that he even had hair on the soles of his feet. When he spent hours doing walking meditation, of course his feet started wearing through, getting all bloody, and this got him discouraged. Well, he said to himself, maybe I'd better return to the lay life. That was back in the days when the Buddha was still alive, so the Buddha levitated there. Don't you wish you had the Buddha levitating to you when your meditation got bad? The Buddha came and said to the monk, when you were a lay person, you used to play the lute, right? The monk said, yes. Well, what happened when the strings were too tight? They would snap. And when they were too loose, you couldn't get a good sound out of them. The Buddha then said it's the same with the meditation. First tune your level of energy, the amount of effort you can put into the meditation. And then tune everything else, all the other faculties, conviction, mindfulness, concentration, discernment to the level of energy you can manage. It's like tuning a guitar. First you tune one string and then you tune the other strings to the RST one. In meditating, your RST string is the amount of energy at your disposal. You want to put enough pressure on yourself to actually get results, but not so much that you snap. And one good way of putting a lot of pressure on yourself without snapping is to keep a good sense of humor about the whole thing, to keep yourself in a good mood. This involves the way you talk to yourself as the meditation goes on. When things don't go well, just drop whatever it is that's not going well. Move back to a level where you're pretty sure you can do things properly. And don't engage in a lot of recriminations, because they don't help anything at all. Just remind yourself that that's not what we're here for, drop it, and go on. When you develop this sense of good mood, you can ratchet up the level of pressure, the amount of time you spend with the meditation, the persistence with which you pursue it without snapping. So whatever comes up in the meditation, whether it's good or bad or whatever, always try to keep a good sense of humor. Even when things seem to be going well, maintain a good sense of humor. Don't get swollen up with your importance or your accomplishment, because then you get complacent and it's easy to crash. When I went to study with Ajahn Fuang, one of the RST things that really drew me to him was his sense of humor. A good sense of humor usually goes with wisdom. The ability to step back and keep things in perspective. That's what makes you wise. It's precisely what you need as a meditator. So when things start getting grim, when nothing seems to work, just step back for a bit and try to regain your good humor. You'll indeed that, more than anything else, will carry you through. Suppressed emotions. December 11, 2004. Researchers have done studies showing that people who regularly suppress their emotions tend to be stupider than people who don't. They're less observant and have trouble thinking through things clearly. And so the question is, when you're meditating, are you making yourself stupid? It depends on how you meditate. But RST, you have to understand what it means to suppress an emotion. You deny that it's there. In other words, suppressing it doesn't just mean that you're simply not expressing it, it means that you're also trying to hide it from yourself. The walls of denial go up in the mind. They make it difficult to think clearly, to connect things, to see relationships. And it takes a lot of energy to keep those walls up, which means you have less energy to observe things. This is why suppressing emotions makes you stupid. So as you meditate, it's important to understand that you're not here to suppress an emotion, to deny that it exists. You want to be very clear about what's going on in the mind, but at the same time you want to learn how to use the mind wisely, to approach your emotions wisely. When fear, greed, anger, or delusion come up in the mind, it's not necessarily helpful to express them outside, because sometimes that makes it difficult to observe what's going on, too. There has to be a middle way between the expression and the suppression. This is important. Often as you meditate, you try to tell yourself, don't react. Just be equanimous. Don't get excited. Don't get worked up about things. And then you try to convince yourself that that's what's actually happening. You see ideals of what an enlightened person is. Like very calm, peaceful, equanimous, and you try to clone the calm, to clone the equanimity. Remember, though, that right cloning is not one of the factors of the path. The relevant factor is right mindfulness, having the right frame of reference for dealing with pain and pleasure as they come. If you view the pleasure simply as something to run toward, or the pain as something to fear, or run away from, you're creating a situation in which the emotions that arise, the liking and the disliking, are going to get in the way of really seeing anything. So you want to create a different frame. Instead of seeing yourself as a person partaking of the pain or the pleasure, you want to dismantle that perception. You want to have another way of approaching pain and pleasure, so that you don't feel threatened by the pain, and don't simply indulge in the pleasure. This is why you need a technique as the foundation of your meditation. We've talked many times about meditation as not just a technique, but you can't meditate without a technique, either. You need to view the technique in the context of certain values, certain understandings, but you can't denigrate technique because it provides part of your frame of reference. For example, you're dealing here with the breath, and you may notice that some ways of breathing are more comfortable than others. Then you begin to realize the connection between the discomfort and the breath, the comfort and the breath. And because the breath is something you can control to a certain extent, you've got your handle. You can try breathing in different ways. You can change the rhythm. You can change the texture, the depth. You can try heavy breathing, light breathing, broad or narrow, shallow or deep. That's changing the mechanics of the breathing. You can also change your perception of the breath. When you breathe in, exactly what's happening? What's moving? And what's moving what? Often we have cartoon ideas about the process, and those ideas determine which muscles we're going to expand, which ones we're going to contract, which sensations we believe have to be part of the in-breath, which sensations have to be part of the out-breath. But if you can learn to question those presuppositions, that the breathing opens up. There are lots more possibilities. You can conceive of the body as a sponge. When you breathe, there's energy coming in and out through every pore. If you apply that perception to the breathing, the actual physical sensation of the breathing is going to change as well. The rhythm is going to change. Or you can think of having an energy core that runs down the center of the body. The in-breath comes into that central core. When it goes out, it leaves that central core. Or you can think of breathing in and out through parts of the body that normally aren't associated with the breath. You can breathe in and out through your legs, for example, or through your brain or your hands. As you experiment with notions of the breathing, you discover lots of varieties. And they have different results in terms of feelings of ease or discomfort, pleasure or pain. That patterns of tension in the body that you assumed were a necessary part of having the body sit upright or having the body breathe are actually not necessary at all. You can breathe through them and they begin to loosen up. This leads you to explore other feelings of blockage or pain in the body as well. Say there's a pain in your knee. How much of that pain is actually the result of physical causes, and how much of it is a result of the way you're breathing? You can experiment, and in this way the technique gives you a different framework for looking at sensations of pleasure, sensations of pain. In other words, where there's pleasure you realize that to maintain that pleasure, you can't just wallow in it or create a sense of yourself as gulping it down, because that usually puts an end to it. But if you stay with the breath and maintain your perception of the breathing in the right way, you can maintain that sense of pleasure, too. It's a positive thing. After all, the pleasure that comes from concentration is one of the factors of the path, right concentration. It's something to be developed. As for the pain, that also becomes something you can approach with the tools you've learned from your technique. Try breathing through the tension around the pain. If the pain is in your knee, you can think of the breath coming in and out right at the knee. Or you can think of it going down the leg and through the pain in the knee and then out through the toes. Or if it's already coming into the knee, you can think of it coming in from the kneecap or coming in from behind the knee. There are all kinds of ways you can play with your perceptions of the breath. As you experiment with them, that they have an important impact on the actual feeling of pain and your attitude toward the pain. You feel less threatened by it. You begin to develop an inquisitive attitude, which, as the Buddha said, is how you approach the first noble truth. You want to comprehend it, and that requires you to be inquisitive about pain, trying to understand it. So the breathing technique gives you several important approaches for dealing with the pain. Instead of just sitting here and spinning out over the pain thinking, "Here I am sitting and hurting myself by letting my knee get all bent up like this," you can focus instead on, okay, what are the mechanics of the pain? How do they relate to the energy out in the body? Having a comfortable breath sensation as your basis in some other part of the body gives you a place you can go when the pain gets too much to handle. You've got a place you can turn around and run to, and when you have that sense of safety and security, then you feel less threatened by the pain. You're more inquisitive, and at the same time you actually have tools that can lessen the pain. And because your approach is one of being inquisitive rather than trying to push the pain away or squeeze it away, your attitude is going to have a huge effect on how you experience the pain. There are cases where the change in attitude will make the pain go away. At other times the pain won't go away, but it doesn't matter because you're not involved in trying to feed the pain. You don't yourself forced to consume the pain. You're not a consumer anymore. You're an experimenter, inquiring into what's the nature of this pain? How much does the way you breathe affect the pain? How much does your attitude affect the pain? What are you doing that makes the pain hurt the mind? After all, the pain is something in the body. It doesn't have to hurt the mind. We're doing unskillful things, we have unskillful attitudes, unskillful ways of relating to the pain that drag it into the mind. We've got to turn around and look. Okay, what are we doing that turns the pain into suffering for the mind? So by creating this new frame of reference through the technique, you're not suppressing your fear of pain. Your new frame of reference changes your attitude toward the pain, so that you can see it more clearly. We often believe that our emotions are a given, that they're purely visceral, that they come prior to our thoughts, but that's not necessarily so. A lot of unspoken or poorly articulated attitudes have gotten buried in our minds, a lot of unskillful habits of dealing with pain, say, that come from way back when. Those are the things that fuel our emotions around pain. They also fuel our emotions around pleasure. As we create this new framework, though, we'll start stirring up some of those attitudes and calling them into question. Who is this me that's been devouring the pleasure, and then suddenly NDS itself devouring pain? Who is this consumer? And is it just consuming, or is it also producing the pain, producing the pleasure? Start questioning these attitudes to get a clearer sense of what's actually going on. In this way, you're not trying to clone enlightenment, and you're not trying to suppress your emotions. You're just learning how to deal with your emotions in a more intelligent way. And that way the meditation, instead of making you dumber, actually makes you more perceptive, more intelligent, better able to see relationships. It's not a matter of suppression. It's not a matter of pretending that you're awakened when you're not. You're just learning to be very frank about what's actually going on by learning to question your assumptions of what seems to be obvious about what's going on. So the meditation is not a process of programming you to have a certain sort of personality or certain sort of demeanor. It's not teaching you to clone anything. It's a series of instructions for how to explore. Instead of piling more denial on top of the denial already there in the mind, you're learning how to peel it away, and not to be afraid of it, not to be afraid of what you're going to end as you peel it away, because you've got your tools to deal with whatever comes up. In keeping with the Buddha's teachings, we underscore the profound significance of disseminating wisdom extensively. Today, we've converted this voluminous 1,000-page tome into an easily accessible audio format. Now, the responsibility to further this noble cause rests with you. Through your subscriptions, likes, and content shares, you play a pivotal role in the widespread distribution of these teachings, benefiting countless others. Let's uphold the age-old tradition of sharing knowledge and fostering mindfulness for the greater good of humanity. We invite you to join us in this mission, and together, we can create a profound impact on the lives of many.